So we're reading this morning from the Srimad Bhagavatam, from the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hope everyone can see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So we're reading from the 10th canto, the 12th chapter, and today we'll read texts 4 and 5. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Phala Prabhala Stavaka Sumana Picha Dhatubhihi Kacha Gunja Mani Swarna Bhushita Apya Bhushayan. Translation: although all these boys were already decorated by their mothers with ornaments of kacha, gunja, pearls, and gold, when they went into the forest, they further decorated themselves with fruits, green leaves, bunches of flowers, peacock feathers, and soft minerals. There's no purport. We'll go on to text 5. Mushnanto nyonya shikyadin gyatan arachcha chikshipuhu tatratyascha punar durad tashantascha punar daduhu. Translation: all the cowherd boys used to steal one another's lunch bags. When a boy came to understand that his bag had been taken away, the other boys would throw it farther away to a more distant place, and those standing there would throw it still further. When the proprietor of the bag became disappointed, the other boys would laugh, the proprietor would cry, and then the bag would be returned. This is Srila Prabhupada's purport. This kind of playing and stealing among boys still exists even in the material world, because this kind of sporting pleasure is present in the spiritual world, from which this idea of enjoyment emanates. Janmadyasya yataha, Vedanta Sutra 112. This same enjoyment is displayed by Krishna and his associates in the spiritual world, but there the enjoyment is eternal, whereas here on the material platform, it is temporary. There, the enjoyment is Brahman, whereas here, the enjoyment is Jada. The Krishna consciousness movement is meant to train one how to transfer oneself from the Jada to the Brahman, because human life is meant for this purpose. Atato Brahma Jigyasa, Vedanta Sutra 111. This is the very first sutra of the Vedanta Sutra, the Brahma Sutras. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Krishna comes down to teach us how we can enjoy with him on the spiritual platform, in the spiritual world. Not only does he come, but he personally displays his pastimes in Vrindavan and attracts people to spiritual enjoyment. Om Gyantimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurung Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitanscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, it's so nice to be with you all this morning. It's been a little while for me, so it's always nice to come back, especially on this first full day of Kartik. So we're just starting this very special month. If time allows, I may say a few words about Kartik, but I also want to give enough time to explore the really powerful teaching in this verse and to hold some space for questions and some discussion. So we'll see how it goes. I'm not always so good at managing my time. I was invited to speak, I think it was maybe a week ago, a little over a week ago. And I, as some of you know, I'm embarrassed to admit, but I wasn't able to keep that commitment. And part of the reason I wasn't able to keep that commitment was that I found myself unexpectedly not feeling well. Found myself unexpectedly sick. I ended up testing and it wasn't COVID, but just some other kind of cold or flu or something that's going around. And I bring that up because I want to just start off by saying that I think it's something that we can all relate to, is we don't want to be unwell. We don't want to feel miserable, right? No one really, maybe some people with some mental disturbance, might mix up kind of pleasure and pain and things like that. But for the most part, we want to avoid suffering. We spend most of our time, most of our day trying to avoid suffering. And when suffering comes, it's something that maybe we have to endure, we have to tolerate, but it's something that we really try to get rid of very quickly. We, by nature, as Srila Prabhupada teaches in this purport or highlights in this purport, our nature is to enjoy. Our nature is enjoyment. Everything that we experience in this world has its counterpart, and it's ultimately its source, according to Vedanta Sutra. That powerful aphorism right in the beginning of Vedanta Sutra, that everything that we experience, everything in creation, everything in this world, everything in our lives has its source, its origin in the spiritual world, in the spiritual realm. There's nothing that is not sourced in the spiritual world. And so our natural desire to be well, to enjoy, to experience happiness, fulfillment, and the contrasting our aversion to being sick or unwell, our aversion to distress, our aversion to suffering, all of that it has its origins in the spiritual world. Of course, our spiritual life really begins when we're able to come to terms with the fact that despite our best efforts in this world, we're not really experiencing the enjoyment that we seek. Here, Srila Prabhupada makes a really powerful argument. He says, I'm just going to read from this purport again. He says, there, meaning in the spiritual world, the enjoyment is eternal, whereas here on the material platform, it is temporary. There, the enjoyment is Brahman, whereas here the enjoyment is Jara. Jara, in Sanskrit, one of the meanings of Jara is dull. So it's a dull kind of, it's an enjoyment that's dull, that's ignorant, that's ultimately dissatisfying. And we need to come to terms with that. We need to admit that. If we're not willing to admit that, and I'm not, pointing the finger at anyone else, I'm as guilty of this as anyone else is. I think we all struggle with this. When we're not able to admit that our best efforts in this world to squeeze out some enjoyment from this world are futile. When we're not able to admit that, we can't actually begin our spiritual journey. We find in the traditions, especially in the traditions of the East, we find in the various Hindu or Vedic traditions, we find even in the traditions of Buddhism and Jainism, this is a common feature where the first, like in Buddhism, it's called the first noble truth. Patanjali also speaks about this in the Yoga Sutras. You find this again and again in all these different paths. Their conclusions may be slightly different, but they all begin from the same starting point, and that is, as Gautama Buddha, as the Buddha said, sarvam dukkham. That all is dukkha, all is suffering. That doesn't mean there aren't happy moments that we experience, but as Srila Prabhupada points out, they're temporary. They're flickering and temporary. At best, they give us some glimpse into an experience of enjoyment or happiness, but they're temporary. And when we admit that, then we come to the conclusion that ultimately, despite those small flickering glimpses of happiness, ultimately, this material world, the nature of this material world is dukkha, is suffering, or is, as one of my teachers puts it, he says, it's existentially dissatisfying. Existentially dissatisfying. That is the nature of this world. Now, that sounds very pessimistic to us. We might think that's really pessimistic. Imagine getting a greeting card and you open it up, happy birthday, sarvam dukkham, all is suffering, everything is miserable. All right, see you later, right? That sounds very pessimistic, but it's actually not pessimistic. It is ultimately realistic. And even beyond that, as we'll get to in just a minute, from the bhakti perspective, it's actually optimistic. It's realistically optimistic. Why is that? When we actually face the fact that this world, the material world, is existentially dissatisfying, is sarvam dukkham, when we're able to face that fact, we can actually begin our process of healing. We can actually begin our process of pursuing our real enjoyment, our real contentment. So there's like an example, and the reason I mentioned not feeling well last week. Sometimes we're feeling sick. This is just an example, right? On the material level, physically, physiologically, we're not feeling well, but we don't want to admit it. Have you ever had this experience? We don't. So we say, no, I'm fine. Yeah, I say Andrews, right? We say, I'm okay. I can do it. I can plow through. Or we just deny it, right? We're hurt. We have a part of our body that's hurting, that's aching, and we just say, no, it's nothing. I'm okay. As long as we're denying it, we're not going to do anything to get better, right? But when we acknowledge the pain, when we acknowledge the suffering, when we acknowledge that we're not well, two things. One is we're facing reality so we can do something about it. Okay, I'm not well right now. I'm sorry, Prabhu, I need to skip the Bhagavatam class. I can't give Bhagavatam class. I need to go back to bed. I need to get more rest. I need to take some medicine, right? I need to do what I need to drink fluids, whatever, all these different things that we do to get better. I need to take care of that. But I won't even begin to think in that way if I'm still denying the illness, if I'm still, right? So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, if I can acknowledge the illness, and it's subtle, but I hope you'll get this, because it's so important, even as sadhakas, even as practitioners of a spiritual path, or aspiring devotees, we still struggle with this so much. So please try to understand, it's a very subtle point, but if we can acknowledge that we have an illness, we also acknowledge that we are not that illness. We acknowledge that this is a temporary condition. This is not who I really am. And if I can acknowledge that, I can separate myself out from the illness, then I can start to remind myself what it feels like to be well. Now, this is just an analogy, and every analogy has its limitations. As Ananda Bihari knows, I love analogies, but even every analogy has its limitation. So in this analogy, we're talking about physical health, but if I can acknowledge my physical health, right, I am separate from my physical state of illness. That's a temporary condition. My actual natural condition is to be well. That is who I really am. And this other manifestation of me as being sickly in some way, or having this symptom or that symptom, that's the temporary unnatural condition. And so acknowledging that helps me to separate myself from the illness, so I can treat the illness while still reminding myself of the actual true nature of who I am. And so when we take this idea spiritually, right, when we take it to the spirit, we are all spiritually, you can say, unwell, or we're at least we can say we're not at 100%, to put it kindly, right? And what's the proof of that? The proof of that, very simple proof. The proof of that is we are here in this material world. We are embodied, right? Because our nature is Satchidananda. Our nature is to be sparks of Krishna, and to have, in minute quality, to have, or minute quantity, I should say, we have the same qualities of Krishna. And those qualities are beyond the material bodies that we now inhabit, the material bodies and minds. So just by dint of the fact that we are embodied, it means we're not well. It means that there's some situation of dis-ease, some unnatural condition. And so we need to get better from that condition. Now, I mentioned these other traditions, like these different lineages, like or Buddhism. So similar to Buddhism, there's Advaita Vedanta, Advaitavad, or Mayavad, we sometimes call it. And in those traditions, I don't want to speak ill of those traditions, but in those traditions, we often find that the highest conception that's offered is relief from the suffering. So again, to use our not feeling well analogy, these traditions, what they say is, we're not feeling well, we have a fever. So what we aspire towards is to break that fever, to be free of that fever, to be free of suffering. You have a cough, be free of the cough, right? You have a backache. Relief is when that back is not hurting in the same way. And in fact, if you look at these traditions objectively, and again, my point is not to criticize other traditions. My point is just to give some context for what our tradition offers, which is really uniquely a really uniquely beautiful, powerful idea. But to just give it some context, we can see, like in the Buddhist tradition, they talk about the ultimate aspiration being nirvana. Nirvana literally means extinguishing. So extinguishing what? Extinguishing this suffering, this dukkham, this artificial condition, right? And that is considered to be the ultimate objective, is just to be free of the suffering. Similarly, in the Advaitin tradition, they talk about this state called Turiya. Turiya is a state that the best thing we can say about it, the Upanishads, or the best not best, but the closest thing that we can imagine or analogize to, the Upanishads say, is a state of deep sleep. So imagine you're just exhausted and you're suffering and you're in pain and maybe you're ill or whatever, and then you fall into a deep, deep sleep. And in that sleep, there's some freedom from the suffering, right? And that's good. That's nice. So we talk about shanti as a state of peace, freedom from anxiety, freedom from suffering. So that's good. But in our tradition, in this Gaudiya Vedanta tradition, Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, we take it to the next step. We say, yes, there's relief from suffering, but ultimately, real happiness is not just relief from suffering, but it's a return to our actual state of enjoyment, to the real enjoyment that we experience. And as Srila Prabhupada reminds us in this purport, the mere fact that we are almost, you can say, naturally or instinctively driven towards enjoyment, right? Why is it that in culture after culture, cultures that have never interacted with one another, in ancient times, we find the same patterns of enjoyment, right? Srila Prabhupada, or the Bhagavatam rather, is describing this game that the cowherd boys are playing, that the gopas, sakas are playing. Many of us played a similar game when we were kids, whether we grew up in America or India or Europe or Africa or wherever, right? And if not this game, other games, right? We find that the propensity to play games, to enjoy with one another, to tease one another, right? To make jokes, right? What is the origin of comedy, right? Can anyone trace it back? Why are we so instinctually, naturally, even no one has to teach us these things, we're drawn to them? You get some kids together, you don't need to teach them, they'll come up with their own games. And often these games are strikingly similar to what we're reading here in the pages of the Bhagavatam, describing events that happened in millennia ago, right? So that natural propensity is there. The mere fact that natural propensity is there means that somewhere deep down inside us, that is what we remember. That is, we have an existential, we're speaking existentially this morning, we have an existential remembrance or memory. It may not be literally, we may not remember the way we remember, an event that happened a month ago or something, but deep down inside, right? Have you ever had that experience where maybe you go to a holy place or something, or you're standing in front of the deities and you have that, it's almost like, it's not quite deja vu, but it's this feeling that this is home, right? I remember the first time I went to, I had this experience, first time I went to Vrindavan, but also the first time I went to the Govardhan Eco Village, just outside of Mumbai, which is kind of a meditation on Vrindavan, a recreation of Vrindavan. I had that feeling. It was such a strong feeling. I had that feeling as soon as I set foot there, that I'm home again. And to be honest, I don't want to speak too much about my own experiences, but I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences. The first time I stood before Radha Murlidhar, which was many, many years ago, I had this experience. I had this almost irrational, you can say, or I like to think of it as sort of trans-rational, super-rational, beyond the rational mind. This experience of standing in front of those deities and just feeling like I'm home again. That this is not something that's foreign to me. This is something that is very much picking up a relationship that has been existing. So that feeling, it's not just a feeling, if we can really try to understand it, not from our heads, but from our hearts, that is an actual remembrance of something that it's where we come from. It's our source. And we're trying to replicate that in this material world in so many different ways. One of our acharyas, Rupa Goswami, he has taken the essential teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and explained them and articulated them in such a wonderful kind of scientific way. And one of the things Rupa Goswami did is he took this framework that was actually found in Sanskrit drama and poetry that talks about different moods and different relationships. And Rupa Goswami took that and he explained, he used that as the basis for explaining bhakti in this way, where he argues, just as Srila Prabhupada argues in this purport, that we are drawn to enjoyment in this world. We're drawn even to relationship in this world, because what is relationship after all? Relationship and enjoyment are so tied together. In every relationship, we're looking for that satisfaction, that connection, that enjoyment, that happiness, that experience, that dynamic experience. We're looking for that in every relationship. Rupa Goswami says, the mere fact that we can experience these different relationships in this life, in this world, implies or suggests or reminds us that each of these relationships find their fulfillment, their ultimate fulfillment in the spiritual world, that Krishna is engaging with each of these relationships in the spiritual world. And there are 5 primary ones. Let me just share briefly. I know we're coming to the end, towards the end of our time, and I want to leave some time for questions. But just briefly, in this world, we all have these experiences of these different relationships. So the first one Rupa Goswami talks about is called Shantaras. And Shantaras, some of you may be familiar with this framework. Shantaras means a kind of a relationship that is a passive relationship, but it's a relationship of love nonetheless. And one way we can think about this is we all have in our lives those relationships that we're drawn to, where we're kind of worshiping or adoring or loving the object of our affection from afar, right? We have our heroes and heroines. We have our idols that we look up to, our role models. We have our almost, you can say, people that we follow, that we express our connection to, although they may or may not know us even, right? Think about all these celebrities. I know it's a bit of a crude example, but think about all these celebrities or influencers these days that, right? There's, practically speaking, millions of people. I don't remember now who the celebrity is. It's probably some Kardashian or a film actor or something like that. But there are people who, like, on Twitter or on Instagram, they have, millions of followers, literally, right? It'll say like, whatever, 2.3 million following. Now, does each of those people, in a way, that's a relationship of love in a way. Each of those, 2.3 million followers of such and such, they're having an experience, but that experience is a bit of a passive experience, right? They're kind of sending their love from afar. They're following this person. They're keeping up with them. They're placing their consciousness in them, but it's a little bit of a distance, right? So it's something like Shantaras, and Krishna has that also in the spiritual world. There are those who relate to Krishna in this more passive way. They're not unhappy about it. They love it. It's wonderful. But it has a certain flavor to it. But a little bit more intimate than that, Rupa Goswami says, is dasyaras. And dasyaras is the experience of love where one is actually able to serve in some tangible way the object of their love. Right. And so we have people who we may look up to, and who we get to render some service. We get to do something for them. Right. I know we're not used to thinking of our bosses like this. Most of us, rather than love, it's other emotions, which we won't get into as far as bosses. There was a whole comedy movie some years ago about people who wanted to actually murder their bosses. So it can get really dark. But let's say in a really good functioning system, you get to work for, your dream job, working for, someone that you really admire, right? I can't even think of an example, because even, any example I give, people find some quality that they don't admire. But imagine just someone who's like really dynamic, your favorite author or something, and you get to assist that person. You get to do something about, you get to do a little bit of proofreading or editing for that person, or your favorite artist, and you get to assist them, whatever it is, right? Your sports hero, the musician you really admire, and you get to do something for them. Whatever it is, there's a feeling of that love intensifies because now I get to act on it, right? And Krishna has that in the spiritual world. There are those whose primary way of relating to Krishna is to offer some simple but heartfelt loving service. That's dasaras. And of course, many of us have experienced the life of a parent and the love of a parent. And even those of us who may not be parents in the literal sense, whether biologically or through adoption or foster children, but in other ways, all of us, I think, at some point or another, experience that kind of parental affection for another, right? Whether it's just someone you take under your wing, or even, and again, I'm not criticizing, but there are some that have that kind of feeling towards a cat or a dog or a bunny or something like that, right? People talk about being parents. Even I know some people that they say like, yeah, I'm they point to their puppy or something and they say, yeah, I'm his mommy, right? Or they talk about their fur babies. So what is that? That's a natural expression of a kind of parental affection, a parental love. So there's action, there's service. If you've ever had a fur baby or a non-fur baby or someone you're taking care of in that parental way, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of service. There's service, but there's more intimacy even than the service that you give to your boss or to your hero that you admire or whatever the person you work for, because it's a very intimate form of service where you're serving and loving and protecting and sometimes even correcting or chastising, right? You have to sometimes chastise your child, you have to, or your fur baby, you have to take care of them, you worry about them, right? So all those emotions are there. So it's a more intensified form of love. And of course, we find that also in the spiritual world where Krishna is relating to not just Nanda and Yashoda, who are the exemplars of that kind of love, but to so many residents, to the older gopis who love Krishna like a mother, right? This is also part of the culture, is you have so many, right? It's almost like an extended family. You have so many like uncles and aunties who are like other parents to you, or grandparent type figures, right? Even older siblings sometimes there's a little bit of that parental affection. So Krishna is experiencing that a little bit also with Balaram as the older sibling, right? He calls him Dauji, big brother. It's a very sweet interaction. And then that intimacy, so Krishna has that relationship with Balaram, but also they're kind of like peers also. And so the next level Rupa Goswami talks about Sakyaras. And that's very much the mood of this verse, or not just the mood, that's actually what's being described in this verse and what Srila Prabhupada is pointing to in the purport. This Sakyaras, the love becomes even more intensified, where now you are able to render some service, but you're also able to take service. That may seem weird to us if we think about it, if we put the object of our love on a pedestal. But when that love is so intimate, when there's more intimacy, like between two friends, you can joke around, you can give, you can take, right? The formality goes down a little bit, or not a little bit, a lot. And so as these relationships progress, as these rasas progress, Rupa Goswami explains what's going down, not because of lack of respect, but because of the intensity of love, the formal nature of the relationship goes down, right? The formalities go down and the intimacy goes up. And so with friends, there's much less formality. You use nicknames with each other. You don't formally address each other. You may not always offer obeisances to one another. Sometimes you might, out of respect, but also you embrace, you kid around, right? You slap someone on the back, your friend. It's your friend's birthday, or birthday punches. That's what we used to do as kids, right? These are very intimate dealings. And this is what we see with Krishna and the cowherd boys. They play with each other. They hit each other. They tease each other. They take the food from each other. Here they play this game, which some of us, when we were growing up, we called it monkey in the middle, or keep away. That's what they tease. And the boy that's being teased, the Sakha who's being teased, he cries a little bit, but he's also having fun. But it's all those emotions come out, and they make up, they give him back his lunch, and it's okay, all right, whatever. And then next time he teases someone else, and sometimes they even tease Krishna, right? So it's that kind of intimacy, that kind of where Krishna is always their object of affection and devotion, but that love is so deepened, it's so strong, it's so intensified, that in the kind of madness of love, they can even make fun of Krishna. They can even tease Krishna. They can even defeat Krishna in a game, right? So that intensity, and of course, it culminates, according to Rupa Goswami, this intensity of love and this decrease in formality and deepening and increase of intensity of love. It intensifies and it finds its fulfillment, just as milk can be cooked down into this wonderful milk sweet that's like condensed, pure, just sweetness and richness. That culminates in what Rupa Goswami calls Madhurya Ras, or what's sometimes also called Shringara Ras. And Madhurya or Shringara Ras is exemplified, as some of us heard last night. If you were at the Sharad Purnima celebration at the Bhakti Center, you heard Radhanath Maharaj speak about the perfection of love that's shared between the gopis and Krishna. So much so that Krishna himself has to admit, I'm defeated. I have nothing. There's no way I can repay your love. So let your love be its own reward. I can't repay it. Anyway, there's so much we can speak about that. But the idea is that as that love progresses through these various relationships, and it's not that one relationship is better than another. It's not about better or worse. It's just a deepening and intensifying. And so in that way, the intensified form of love, it allows us to experience real enjoyment. That actually, we may think, sometimes I know I can be a little cynical, and I may think that, oh, well, all these stories that we find in the Bhagavatam, isn't that just like what we're imagining? Because, that's the kind of stuff we do here. So we imagine, I have friends here and I keep away here. So maybe I just, someone imagined that and wrote it into the Bhagavatam. So that's a more cynical take. But if we actually take seriously what Rupa Goswami and what Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas are teaching us, and ultimately what the Bhagavatam is suggesting to us, if we really take that seriously, it's the exact opposite. It's that we are drawn to those things here. Why? Because they're reminding us of their perfected state, right? Why do we get so into playing games here and hanging out with our friends here? Is because we have an entire world of friends and games waiting for us. The last thing I'll say, and I know we're just 5 minutes out. The last thing I'll say is, Srila Prabhupada would very, very often, if you look at what Prabhupada would speak in lectures and what he would write about in purports and what he would even in personal conversations, Srila Prabhupada would very, very often emphasize this enjoyment, particularly of the cowherd boys, Krishna and the cowherd boys. And on a couple of occasions, Srila Prabhupada even gave us a glimpse into his own, you can say, inner heart. And I remember, some of you may be familiar with some of these stories of Srila Prabhupada, these leelas of Srila Prabhupada. But at least on one or two occasions, Prabhupada shared with some of his disciples, he said, I'm simply longing to go back to this, to Krishna, to have lunch. I think he said to have lunch with Krishna and his cowherd friends. And Prabhupada speaking very personally. So again, we can't necessarily speculate. Some devotees like to take that into a place of maybe trying to better understand what is Srila Prabhupada's eternal identity in the spiritual world. Is he a cowherd boy? Is he a manjari? Is he this? So we may not be, that's, as the saying goes, above our pay grade. That's a little bit above our pay grade. But at least the spirit of it, Srila Prabhupada really exemplified and wanted us to really believe in the deepest core of our hearts, and he wanted to give us hope. Because in a sense, even more so, of course, we worship the example of the gopis, but in a sense, what we can really relate to, right, is that love of Krishna as a friend. Srila Prabhupada on one occasion said, when he was asked, what does the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra mean? He said, it simply means my friend, oh my friend. Right? So we can relate to that. Krishna is our ever well-wishing friend, and he's waiting for us to return. So we can play games like keep away. So we can have these picnics in the forest. So we can decorate our bodies and his body and with peacock feathers and all sorts of different feathers and leaves and flowers. and we can experience that enjoyment that our hearts are hankering after, that we're searching for in everything and everyone. It's waiting for us. It's waiting for us there. This is the promise that Srila Prabhupada is reminding us of in this purport. And that we have an opportunity, especially at times like Kartik, we have an opportunity to draw nearer to Krishna in this very intimate way of connecting to him as our best friend. So thank you so much. I'll let it rest there. And I've done a terrible job. I've only left 3 minutes for questions. So if anyone has a burning question or comment, and the chat box is full also. Let me catch up on the chats here. Okay, so the idea of the illness example is resonating with folks. My bag is going to be stolen. I have to be careful. I go to the Bhakti Center next. Yeah, we can experience this paternal affection so many different ways. Wonderful points. Does anyone have any final questions, comments, reflections, anything they'd like to share?
Great class, Venkata Bhatta Prabhu. Here's a question from Rich. How does the spirit of servant of the servant of the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna fit into the context of the 5 rasas?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'll just share my understanding of it is, although apparently there can seem to be some contradiction there. My understanding is that they actually align very well, because it's an interesting thing on the one hand, and Radhanath Maharaj spoke about this yesterday, or he hinted at this yesterday as well. We all have a uniquely personal, individual relationship with Krishna. As Maharaj was reminding us yesterday, Krishna plays his flute, Muralidhar plays his flute, and there is a note mystically, inconceivably, there's a note where each of us hear our own name. Each gopi heard her own name. Each cow, this is in Shastra as well, each cow hears their own name. Krishna calls each cow playing the flute by name. So there's something really personal and individual about that. And at the same time, we approach Krishna, we do approach Krishna directly, but Krishna is especially pleased when we are in this mood, as Rich says, of servant of the servant of the servant. And we see this, of course, exemplified in the lives of the gopis. So the gopis are doing that. They're always assisting one another. They're always pushing one another forward towards Krishna. They're glorifying one another, but they also enjoy that individual relationship with Krishna. So both is there. And in these rasas, we can experience our particular rasa, that particular rasa with Krishna. Each devotee, each perfected devotee experiences that rasa with Krishna, but they also are very eager to engage others in their relationship with Krishna. So it's a both and. That's my understanding.
Thank you. Temple Room, do you have any questions or contributions? Adipusha Prabhu, Jai Sita, Ross in the back. He's filling in for Arjuna Prabhu, probably. Adipusha Prabhu, unmute yourself.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Oh, no class. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Wonderful class, very, elaborate description. And it's nice that you made the explanation that this monkey in the middle, or keep away the other person's lunch. In the material world, it might be done out of putting someone down, but in the context, Krishna's so wonderful. Krishna's so wonderful that he's inviting us into another quality of life. That these cowherd boys, they had affection for each other, and there was some teasing, but it was playful, and it wasn't out of enviousness, and that even the person being teased was enjoying it, and it was pleasing to Krishna. So, Krishna's so wonderful that he's exhibiting a different quality of life that there is in spiritual world, in devotional service, and he's inviting us into that. And it's so consoling, because he spoke about how there's so much suffering and depression, and and that's a good beginning. But then there's something beyond that. Parastas matu bhavanyo, beyond this world that we see, there's another quality of existence. And David Ritaswamy does these, what is it, gospel songs. And there's one that he sings when he's driving long distance. He sings these gospel songs. He plays them on the vehicle. There is a river of love that flows through the city of God. You have to see him like sing like that. That there, like it says, if we open up our dormant love for Krishna, our genuine affection for everyone else is there, and that's very consoling. That there's a loving world. The conscious is about to blow in like 1 second. Well, glories to Prabhupada, Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, God Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.
But great class, great analogies. I feel like a Gurukul student in your class. You should be a Gurukul teacher, Venkata Bhatta. Great thing.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Please. And turn your cameras on. Welcome back. Where were Isabel, Spirit Soul, Hare Krishna. Okay. Thank you very much, dear devotees. It was a wonderful class by Venkata Bhatta Prabhu. Okay, so when was the last time you pranked somebody? So let's prank them. I'm gonna go prank my wife. Hemangi, prank your husband. Put something in his lunchbox. Put something funny in there. Okay? Bruce, Amish, Bhima Prabhu. Bhima Prabhu, prank Snow White Krishna. Isabel, prank your family. Think of something cool. Yeah, Krishna is a playful God. Krishna consciousness is fun, right? So yeah.
Ananda Bihari, you have food on your face. You got to clean it off. It's like this big, like some spinach on your face, man. It's so embarrassing.
Yeah. Thank you, Bhima Prabhu. Thank you. Good prank. Okay. I love you all. Haribol. Happy Kartik. This is the first day. Don't screw up. And see you again tomorrow. I love you.